Hi, in this video today I'm going to take you through how to turn a jumper or a sweatshirt into a simple bum bag for you to use. So what we'll need for making the bum bag is an old jumper or sweatshirt. You might have one around your home that you can use, or you could find one online on a second-hand shop that you can buy and use to make this bum bag. You'll also need some pins, a needle and some sewing thread to work with, a pencil, an A4 sheet of paper, a ruler, a tape measure and some scissors. To get started, we're just going to start by making our template using the A4 paper. So I'll just move everything else out of the way for now. And all we'll need is the paper, the pencil and the ruler. So taking your paper, we're just going to cut a couple of strips off the top and the side of it to make it the right size to use as a template. So using your ruler, mark 4 centimetres away from the bottom edge with a few pencil lines and just join those up with your ruler to create a nice straight line going all the way across. And then we're going to do the same on this side. Mark a few lines 4 centimetres away from the right hand edge of the paper and then join them all up with one long line. Next, we're going to take our scissors and just cut these 2 strips off. So I'm going to start by cutting the longest strip off, as this can be used as part of our template later on. So just being careful with your scissors and keeping them away from your hands. Cutting down that long line to create a strip of paper like that. Next we do the bottom edge, cutting along the shorter line to create another strip of paper. So we don't need these now, so I'm just going to put these to one side and focus on this main template. All we need to do to this is just measure the length of the piece of paper that is left. So here, my piece of paper is 25.5 centimetres long. So I just want to split that in 3 so that we can fold it to make our bag shape. So that's roughly 8.5 centimetres. So I'm just going to make 2 marks, one at 8.5 centimetres and another 8.5 centimetres from that, so that's at 17. And then just take the ruler away and you can just fold the paper roughly on that first mark so it hits the second mark. So hopefully you can see there that I'm folding it up to the second mark. And just make a nice crease along there, and then we can just fold the top half down as well. So this will be the final size of the bum bag with a flap like that, and we'll sew up these 2 edges so there's a nice bag in there to store things. On the back we're just going to make a couple more marks at 3 centimetres in from each edge. So 3 centimetres from this edge and 3 centimetres from this edge. And this is where on the back of the fabric we'll be cutting 2 holes. So you can just roughly draw the shape there. This is where we'll thread our strap that we're going to also make out of the sweatshirt material through, and that's what will hold the bum bag around your waist or hips. So next stage is working on the fabric. So I'm going to bring back the jumper. Depending on the size of the jumper or sweatshirt that you're working with, you might have a lot of fabric to play around with, or you might have not that much. This one is a man's jumper, so there's quite a lot of fabric here, and it's kind of your choice where you want to take your fabric from. You can just open up your template that you've made and pick what kind of fabric you want to use for your bum bag. So I'm actually going to make use of the ribbing along the bottom edge of the jumper to make quite a sturdy back and front of the bum bag later on. So I'm going to just place my template up against the edge, the bottom edge of the jumper, and then pin it in place. So just be careful that you're only pinning one layer of the fabric. So placing your hand underneath the fabric and the paper and just pushing a pin through like that. We're just going to carry on doing this around the edges. Just to secure it roughly in place before we cut out our fabric. Try and keep the fabric nice and smooth as you're pinning it, so you don't have any weird bumps in the fabric when you come to cut it out. So you can just use that hand underneath the fabric to smooth it out as you go to pin it. And one final pin on that edge. So I'm going to cut around this paper template now, just taking our scissors and carefully cutting along the edge of it. Make sure again that I'm just getting the top layer of the jumper and not cutting through two layers of the jumper at once. And I'll just cut along that final edge of the jumper at the top. Again. So once you cut the whole shape out like this, you can remove the pins. Careful when you're working with the pins not to stab yourself, as they can be quite sharp. And there's the first rectangle of the jumper that we'll be working with to make the main body of the bag. So we're going to cut one more of these out, so I'll just put this one to the side. And again, I'm going to use this bottom edge of the fabric and just pin the template to it. So it's good to try and place your template as close to where you cut your other piece of fabric out as possible, so you're not wasting too much fabric when you're cutting it out. So I've just left a thin strip between the two so I can make sure that edge is still nice and neat when I come to cut it. I'm just taking my scissors again and cutting along the outside edge of the template. It's best when you're picking your jumper or sweatshirt to pick something that isn't knitted, so it's more of like a jersey material, as this frays less and won't come apart when you cut into it. So I've cut the second rectangle out there, so I'm just going to take the pins out and we can start to work on making these fabric rectangles into a bum bag. So for now, I'm just going to put the jumper aside. We'll come back and use a bit more of the fabric again later. And the next stage is to sew these two rectangles together. This will give us a nice strong base of fabric for the actual bag. So I'm going to alternate the placement of this thick ribbing so it's not too chunky and heavy on one end. So there you can see I've got both the rectangles of fabric together, and I've got both the good sides, so the front of the fabric, facing out. So in my case with this sweatshirt, you can see the textured knit kind of jersey texture on the inside and on both pieces, and the face of the fabric on the outside. So again, just going to put a couple of pins to hold them together in place. If there's any areas where you feel one piece of the fabric is kind of a little bit bigger and poking out more than the other one, you might want to just trim those down so it's a kind of clean edge. Just being careful with your fingers as there's not that much fabric to hold on to there. I'm just going to put a few pins to hold the pieces together in place. So the main stitch we're going to be using to go around and sew these two pieces together is a whip stitch. So I'm just going to show you how to do that using a contrasting thread across the top of this panel. So what you want to do is take about a length of about 30 centimetres of your embroidery thread, thread up your needle and just tie a knot at the other end. So once you've got your knot in the end of the needle, you can start in the corner of your piece of fabric and start going into one side of the fabric in the middle. So your knot will be hidden between the two layers. And you just want to go about half a centimetre from the edges. So half a centimetre in from this left-hand side and from the top edge. So I'm just pulling that thread through from the inside, coming out to the right side of the fabric, and then looping it over the top like that. And going back through. So that's just holding the 2 layers together nice and tightly and securing the edge so it doesn't get too kind of frayed on that edge. So your next stitch is just going to be about another 1/2 centimetre to the right. So coming up just to the side, hopefully you can see that there, and then going over the edge again. And when you go through the back this time, you can go at a kind of diagonal angle with your needle. So you're coming from the back across as you stitch, rather than going straight through from front to back. So I'll show that again here, a little bit closer to the camera. So the needle's at the back, but you're kind of pushing it across. And you're just building up an edging of stitching like that. So if you want to really stop the kind of loose edges of your sweatshirt fabric from fraying, you'll need to do more stitches closer together. In this example, I'm going to show them a little bit spaced apart so they're easy to see, and so I can show you the whole process. And also you could do this with your style if you're happy to have a bit of a kind of raw edge on your fabric, so it's not totally neat and there's a little bit of texture on the edge. So it's up to you what style of stitching you want to do. So I'm just going to carry on around that edge. When you come towards the end of your thread, so when you start to run out of it, you just need to do a stitch so that your needle and thread come up in the middle of the 2 pieces of fabric again. So looping over like normal, but finishing in the middle of the 2 pieces of fabric. And then you can just use your fingers and the thread to tie a knot in the middle there, just to secure the end of that piece of thread. And then if there's any excess, you can just trim that down with your scissors carefully. And starting up a new needle and thread in the same way as before, bringing the needle in between the 2 layers so the knot is hidden, and then looping it over that edge. So you might notice the jersey fabric that hasn't got this ribbing edge frays a little bit, so it starts to unravel a little bit as you're sewing it. You can always come back after you've done all your stitching and trim that down, and the stitching should help it not to unravel anymore. You could also make this using other items of clothing you have around your house. You just need enough fabric that's going spare to work with, and you could use something that maybe doesn't fray at all, like a sportswear jacket, or some leather maybe from a jacket, as well, as those they might be a little bit tougher to work with, but they will maybe be also a little bit stronger. So just carrying on all the way round that top edge and part the way down these side edges. So you might find that the fabric shifts as you're sewing it, and there might be some more bits that you want to trim off to keep it nice and neat. So the reason we're just going to do part way down these two side edges is because this bit will be folded up on both sides to make your bag. So it's probably best, so that we don't create any bubbles when we're sewing it, to do part of the stitching now with the whole piece flat on each side, and then we'll fold it and carry on sewing down those sides. But just as a guide, you can mark where we want to sew up to now. So we're only actually sewing up to here and here before we're going to repin it in place. So I'll just use these pins to mark that point out. Like that. So hopefully you can see those two pins there on either side is where we're just sewing over the edges to secure it in place. Okay, now you can see I've gone around this top edge and the two sides up to that point where we're going to fold the bag, so you can see like that. So I'm just going to turn it so it's this way round. So it's kind of up to you which way you want to be the front and the back of the fabric. So I've decided that this side is going to be the front of my bag flap there. So taking out the couple of pins on the end that were holding that in place, just going to fold that bottom third up to join like that, making sure the edges are all in line with each other, and getting that bottom edge of the fabric there so that it's hitting that bottom stitch on each side. So then once you pin this in place, you can see that that top edge is going to fold over like that, creating a neat little bag. And I'm just going to put a pin in this edge here, which is like the top of the bag pouch, to hold those two layers together. So once that's all in place, we're going to carry on sewing using that same stitch that we have on the other edges. First I'm going to start with that top edge of the bag pouch whilst it's a bit freer to get to, using the same 30 centimetres of thread and tying a knot in the end. And again, bringing it in on that corner so the knot is hidden between the two layers. So as I'm nearing the edge on this top edge, we can soon start to form our bag shape by going down the two side edges with the same stitch, but in this case we'll be catching 4 layers of the fabric in one go. So this could be a little bit tougher to sew with when there's the 4 layers of fabric there, so you might have to be more careful with your needle as it can be harder to feel where it needs to go. So I'm just going to take that pin out there that was holding that down and just reposition now that I've sewn that top edge so the 4 sides are in line with each other. And using the same stitch, I'm just going over the edge like so, catching all 4 layers in one stitch. So just finishing off this edge where I run out of thread to seal up that side of the bag. Make sure there's no gaps at the bottom for anything to fall out of. You might want to do some extra stitches just in the corner so it's really strong, as that's where there'll be the most tension on the bag and the thread that's holding it together once you're actually using it. So I'm just going to go over that bit in the corner 3 or 4 times. And then knot off again in the same way as normal. There you go, so you can see one side of the bag is now sewn down, and so we've got that shape starting to form. So I just need to do the other side and then we can move on to the next stage. So as you can see, I've now sewn down both edges there and I've got the bag shape that is going to be our final little bum bag. So you can just fold that patch over and you can see the shape of your final bum bag. Obviously I've done it with a contrasting stitch, but I could use a matching colour and the stitching would be less of a feature on it. So the next stage is to create the strap and the holes that are going to attach it to each other and then be what attaches it to you when you're wearing it. So first off, we're going to create the holes where our strap will thread through and hang within the bag. So that's where we did the 3 centimetre mark on our template. So I'm going to take the ruler again at this point and use the pins to make these marks on the back of your fabric pouch. So again, measuring 3 centimeters in from the edge and just putting a pin there. You also want it to be a couple of centimeters from that top edge of your bag so that it doesn't get shown on the front in the flap. So again, we've got another one 3 centimeters in from that side. So with those pins in place, now we can cut a little hole with our scissors where they are. So be careful not to catch yourself again with the scissors. This might be a little bit tough, so you might have to go through each layer at a time and just cut 1 centimeter down, across, and then back up. So it's a little square hole in that position. So as you can see there's a small little flap, and I'm just going to cut that off. And then I'm just going to do the same thing on the layer underneath. Again, being careful not to catch yourself with your scissors. And taking your time to get through the layer. There we go, should have a little hole there that you can see my fingers coming through, and we can just put 2 pins on either side of that, as we're going to do the same whip stitching that we've been doing around the outside edges to secure those 2 layers together. Just going to cut this other hole first, and you want to get it at the same level roughly, so you can use your ruler just to give yourself a bit of a guide, and maybe use another pin just to mark where the top of your first hole lies, like that. So I created a little rectangle with the pins so I know where to cut into. There we go, the second hole is all cut out there. And again, I'm just going to pop a couple of pins either side to hold those 2 layers together. And we're just going to take our needle and thread again and sew around the edges of those holes to hold them together and stop the fabric from fraying. So again, bring the needle up in between the 2 layers so that knot is hidden in between the 2 layers of fabric, and just starting in the corner of one of these holes that I've cut and just doing that same stitch around the edge of the hole. So you might find that you need to take your pins out as you're sewing, or maybe just move them around a little bit so they don't get in the way. There you go, and you can finish off your stitching in the same way as before, taking the needle to the back and up in between the 2 layers of the fabric and tying a knot. There we go. So you can see there that one of the holes I've just done the stitching all the way around that edge. So again, just taking the needle up through the 2 layers of fabric in the kind of corner of that hole that we've cut out and stitching all the way around the edge. go, and I've finished off that hole as well. So I'm going to do the finishing stitch of that just in the same way as before. You might find that it's easier to do it from the inside the bag, so turning it round and just catching some of the stitches to make a little knot like that. And hiding the end of the thread in between the two layers. So there you go, you can see then that the two holes are finished nicely with that whip stitch and positioned a little bit away from both the edges. You might notice at this stage that there's some gaps where you feel like you could go back and add some more stitching. So I've got one here where it just needs a couple more stitches. And so now's a good point to do that. Just filling in any spaces there might be. There we go, so we've got that bag base all finished off. I've noticed a few bits up here that I just want to trim down some of the excess frayed edge, so it's a little bit neater up there. If you want to avoid that frayed edge on the outside along that top bit, you could put the two ribbed edges of your jumper together there, and that would be a totally smooth edge on there. But I quite like the frayed edge. So now we're going to move on to making the strap. So you can just put this to one side for now and bring your jumper material back. So this is where the extra fabric paper templates come in handy. And what you can do is use that width of the template as a nice guide to cut a strip of fabric all the way around the jumper. So you might not have loads spare depending on the size of the jumper you're working with, but you'll basically need about 4 of these rectangles. So you can either cut these as one long length, so just moving it along like that, or if you're short on fabric, you can cut 4 separate rectangles out from different areas of the jumper and then sew them together at the joining edges with that same whip stitch that we were using earlier on. So I'm just going to cut out a nice big loop of the fabric. By just making sure it's nice and flat and pinning it to that fabric. So you might have to cut up the edge a little bit and then along the edge of that paper template. So I'm just going to cut at one of the shorter edges, so that will be the start and end of our strip. These edges are going to get folded in the next stage, so your cutting doesn't have to be dead straight, but you do want to keep it quite even so you get an even thickness. So once you've done one bit like that, don't cut off here and just move your paper template on. This is really good to do on a nice big table. I've got quite a small table here, so it gets a little bit fiddly. But if you've got a big table at home, it's a lot easier to cut out these paper templates with a bit more space. Then when you get to that edge of the jumper, you can flip it over and carry on cutting across the back as well. So it's one big loop of the sweatshirt material. Again, I've reached that edge, so I'm just going to take my paper template off and move it on. You might not need as much of a strap as I do, depending on the size of your waist or your hips that you're going to place your bum bag on when you're wearing it. I've measured my waist beforehand, so that's where I want it to sit. So I measured my waist using the tape measure that I showed at the start of the video and found that my waist was around 84 centimetres. So I'm just making my strap at least that long, but hopefully a little bit longer. So I'll just measure the length of this strap of material once I've cut it all out. So I'm just going to put the extra fabric to one side again. And we can just measure it easily on a small table like this by folding it in half, taking that tape measure, and measuring that length. So yeah, this is 53 centimetres folded in half, so that's going to be 106 centimetres, which will be plenty to work with for making the strap to go around my waist, as I need it to be 85 centimetres plus about 20 centimetres. So that's what you can do when you're measuring yours at home. Just make it however wide your waist or hips are plus 20 centimetres. The next stage is to fold the two rough edges in so you can either do it as quite a thin strap like this, where you're folding one side into the middle, fold another side into the middle, and then folding those closed so you don't have a rough edge at all. Or you can do it just in a similar style, putting the two rough edges together and whip stitching the same stitches we used before all along that edge. I'm going to do the whip stitch version of this, but if you want that nice clean edge with no frayed edge, then you can do the double fold to hide it inside the strap. We'll use the same stitching technique on both versions, so it doesn't matter which one you do here. So that's what you should be pinning if you just want that raw edge. And then this side, I'll show what it looks like if you want the neat edge. So folding each side in and then folding that closed. So it's quite chunky on that edge, and you just put a pin through there. So whichever folding and pinning method you went for, but using that same whip stitch that we've been using all over the bag to seal those two edges. So this time just bringing the thread with the knot at the end in between the layers and going over the edge of the strap like that. So again, it's your choice how you want the finished stitching to look, whether you want it to be quite close together or far apart. It'll just take a little bit longer to do if you're doing it close together. And you just need to carry all the way along that edge. So this bit might take a little bit of time depending how long you need to make it. So just take your time with it, carefully stitching over that edge. So once you've finished doing the stitching all along the outside edge of your strap, we're going to thread this through the back of the pouch, so it acts as a strap connecting the bag to you. So it just goes through all the way like that, and you want to get it so the two ends, when you bring them together, it kind of sits in the middle of them, and we're just going to secure that in place with some stitching just going through the layers. So I'm just going to pin the strap in place. We're just going to do a few stitches just in the middle of it. So again, taking your same embroidery thread, and this time we're just going to do a few crosses to hold it in place. So bringing your needle up from inside the pouch, so you're coming from inside here and you're going through this layer of the strap and the outside of the bag, and you're going to do one stitch going up like that and coming back down, so you can see there's a little stitch going up there, and then I'm going to go to the side to bring the needle up and go over that stitch to create a cross. And I'm just going to do the same thing next to it. So I'm just going to take the pin out now so that's not in the way, and do another stitch just to the right, going over like that, and then over that stitch with another stitch. Now this is quite thick again, it's probably 4 layers of fabric there, so you want to be careful with your needle as you're sewing, as it can be a little bit tougher. To finish that off, I'm just going to do one more cross, just holding that in place. Like so, so there's 3 little crosses just holding the strap in, and I'm going to go back to the other side and just secure it with a big knot on the back to keep that nice and secure. Now as you can see here, there is some stitching visible on the inside of the bag. If you're using a matching thread, this will blend in more with the fabric, but for me it's really showing up. So if you want it to be a bit neater on the inside, it's best to use a matching thread. So there we go, that's in place. So at this stage you can either leave it as it is, and you can just use this strap as a strap that you wrap around your waist or hips and tie a knot at the back to secure it in place, or a bow, and it will just sit like that. Or you can add the D-rings that I showed at the start of the video to one side of the strap. So all you'll have to do with this is just put both the D-rings on the end of one edge and just fold that edge in a bit. So you might want to kind of try it out on your body for where you want the D-rings to sit. So you kind of want them to be wrapping around you and sitting in the middle of your back. So that might mean doubling up the strap quite a lot, so you might need to do it like that. And then just pinning it in place, a couple of pins. So you just need to do some stitching here at the edge of the strap and also nearer to the D-ring. So I'll put another pin in there. And for this, you can do just a couple of kind of straight stitches in a row here, just to hold this area down. So this bit near the D-rings, just threading up your needle like normal and bringing the needle up in between the two layers again, like we did with the other ones, so the knot's hidden in the middle, but this time going through all 4 layers and just doing a running stitch. So that's a line of stitches next to each other, just creating a line of stitching going all the way down. Now to make this extra strong, you can go over your line again once it's all finished. I'm just going to do 1 row of stitching here and then trap that end as well, just to make it extra secure. And actually I'll work back up so the line is fully filled in with the stitching. You can use the lines that are in the kind of texture of the sweatshirt if that's what you're working with. It's quite a nice guide for how to do your line of stitching. And I'm just going to wrap over the top as well. So that's nice and secure now, and you can see there's just a line of stitching going all the way across. And just going to finish that off with a knot at the top. And threading that thread through all the layers and trimming it off. The last bit is just to do this bit where it's folded over. I'm actually going to fold that raw edge again so it's tucked away nicely there, and then we can go through all those layers at once with another line of stitching just like before. So this again is going to be a little bit tougher as it's a few layers at once. And again, bringing that knot in between the layers so it doesn't get seen after you finish stitching. and going all the way through 4 layers. Just to secure that end. In place, and I'm going to wrap that edge again like I did on the last one as well. So hopefully you can see there's just some stitching holding that edge down, and I'll just secure that in place. Again, all the stitching is really visible here because of the yellow contrasting thread I'm using, so you can see what's going on, but using a matching colour it will just blend in with the fabric. You might want it to be contrasting like mine, so just play around with however you want it to look. There we go, so it's all finished now. Your sweatshirt to Bumbag. And if you've got these D-rings on here, you can use them just to thread this through and back down, and that's how your strap sits around your body. You might want to play around with adding a fastening on the front, or see if you want to add a pocket on the inside. This is just a basic template for you to work with.